Pals, I think you're really going to enjoy this video. If you do, please hit the like and subscribe button and comment button. It really helps out.
Obviously, Hurricane Helene struck, and it was a natural disaster of historic proportions. And politically, I do think there's something to note, like the shamelessness with this is, and we really have our work cut out for us. We really do as a movement. There's so many extraordinary advantages that the Republican Party and the MAGA movement have, and one of them is so simple, but it's almost overwhelming, which is their shamelessness. Like the shamelessness with which they will lie in lockstep, blatantly lie about the dumbest, least ambiguous. So, for example, Donald Trump and the RNC research official Twitter page and a bunch of MAGA influencers and even Fox News pundits, because I've been grilling them on my channel, have been perpetuating the idea that President Biden and Vice President Harris did not respond to really any state, but certainly conservative states, red states, about Hurricane Helene. And I think it's so important that there were natural disaster declarations and emergency declarations granted in advance of Helene's downfall. So before the storm actually hit, number one. Number two, every single Republican governor from DeSantis in Florida, McMaster in South Carolina, Youngkin in Virginia, and Kemp in Georgia have publicly said, it is a matter of public record, that President Biden contacted them, asked them whatever they need, if they needed anything, said that they would get anything they needed. They have publicly thanked him. They have praised the coordination and the speediness of the federal government. And I need everyone watching, anyone telling you that the Biden-Harris administration has been slow to respond or has only responded partially is either lying to you blatantly, or they're really stupid, or perhaps both, but they are objectively 100% wrong. No nuance. They don't have a ghost of a point. This is a black and white situation where we are perfect and correct, and they are 100%.
And where's the justice for those lies? We're like talking about some trip to China like a billion years ago. There's absolutely no accountability for these gross, vicious, provable lies about the administration delaying aid. What a disgusting thing to accuse someone else of doing. We'd never hear the end of it if it were on the other side. What's going on?
They're desperate. They're flailing. That's what this is. That, Donald Trump is behind 3-4 points nationally, and it looks like Kamala has a slight edge in the states that she needs to win, and they're looking for anything. And I think they want to believe that it's true, that he's just leaving them in the dark and not sending enough aid. And I think it's probably the case that some of them, or many of them, are just blatantly lying about it, and the rest of them, it's just partisan brain rot, and they're just primed to believe that. But I mean, it's what makes it particularly insane is that they're accusing Biden of doing something that Donald Trump did multiple times when he was president. Donald Trump, in my state of California, when thousands of people were displaced from wildfires that ravaged a community that I was a part of in the Bay Area, people I know were affected by these fires. When people were waiting for federal assistance to come in and help them, I mean, like, it's really important that people get FEMA funds right away. That's to help people get shelter. It's to help people get clothes. It's to help people get food. It's to help people get medicine. And Donald Trump played politics in California, delayed that aid. He eventually released that aid, but there was a delay. North Carolina requested a certain amount of funds when they got hit by was it a hurricane? I don't know what it was, but it was in 2017. Donald Trump gave him 1% of what he asked for. So it is just, not only is it disgusting that they're manipulating and trying to leverage actual suffering for partisan political gain, they're doing it in a way that is so absurd because they are fully projecting Donald Trump did the very thing that they're accusing Biden of doing.
Right. And that's why I think it's important to drive this home. That's why I use phrases like morally superior. I mean it. And I mean all the dehumanization that it suggests. Joe Biden on his worst goddamn day is a morally superior person to Donald Trump on his best day, for all the instances and examples that Hutch provided, to say nothing of what Donald Trump threatened to do when he was president in terms of denying aid to blue states, either for natural disasters like wildfires and hurricane, and also for federal assistance with respect to damage done in the George Floyd riots. Right. There were comments made like, oh, they're too critical of me. Why should we bail them out? To say nothing of the fact, by the way, that it's actually blue states who subsidize red states as a general proposition in this country.
On average.
Yeah. So Joe Biden hasn't done it. It would be so easy for Joe Biden during the various natural disasters that hit Florida to say, you know what, Ron, all the comments that you've made, I'm going to give you a taste of your own MAGA medicine. We're gonna slow walk this aid. He never did.
I'm sure that never even occurred to him.
No,
yes.
absolutely not. Never crossed his mind. He never pulled stunts like that. And I'll also say, because then they move the goalpost. They say, well, guys, okay, fine. He's giving them the aid. He's giving them the resources and the manpower. But why isn't he there? That's also really stupid. State and local officials have begged. They probably are pissed, low-key pissed, that Trump showed up, even though they would never dare defy him publicly. Because when a principal like the president of the United States, the vice president of the United States, or a former vice president who is also one of the leading candidates like Trump, when they show up, it is impossibly disruptive.
It's distracting. It's a secure. Everyone knows now and are complaining about the insufficient levels of security in a time when we need to have all attention focused on and all hands on deck. Why do we think that it's worthwhile for the sitting president of the United States and the sitting vice president of the United States to go down themselves personally the day the hurricane is happening to throw out bounty? Who can think that that's a good idea? But it doesn't matter.
And they have to, like, logistically, there's a lot to consider when you do it. Like, Secret Service has to coordinate with local law enforcement, which is no small undertaking. And in a place that is already drained of resources after a hurricane, it is not only it's a stupid thing to propose that Biden himself should immediately go to the sites of these.
You could make the argument that people could die as a consequence of that because resources would be pulled away.
Literally.
Yes,
we also need to talk about the nature of the federal aid that goes out, because something that I've been seeing a lot, I'm sure you guys have been saying the same thing. The people are only getting $700 from FEMA. Really? That's it? They lose their houses. They only get $700. The $700 is a stipend that goes out immediately. The purpose of that aid is to help people in the first 3 days of this disaster. It's to help them find shelter, food, medication, all these kinds of things. After that, or even at any point, really,
you apply.
You can apply for so many different federal assistance programs to compensate you if you lose your house for stuff that isn't covered by insurance. Like if your insurance only covered you up to a certain amount, the federal government will actually, there's programs where you can apply to where they will give you the rest of that amount. And on top of that, it's Congress that sets the cap on the emergency funds that can be released by the federal government. It's not that Joe Biden, they saw that one clip of him saying, we gave them all we had. He was being literal. He was just
factual statement.
That was his way of saying we have sent everything that we are legally allowed to send. If Congress wanted to change those amounts, and all these Republicans know better, they're just blatantly
they
lying.
voted against it. That's the other thing. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's the other thing. That's the other thing that goes to this. Republicans have consistently voted down expanding the emergency funds and things like that. They've done it. Marjorie Taylor Greene got clocked on this for a fact check because she was begging for federal assistance for Florida. Ron DeSantis was famously hit on this in presidential debates because they're like, hey, you really rely on the federal government when Florida got hit with natural disasters, but while you were in Congress, you consistently voted against expanding federal aid. Republicans are guilty of this. They do this all the goddamn time.
They're lying. They're blatantly lying. All of them know that they could convene a session of Congress tomorrow and vote for a bill that would double or triple the amount of FEMA funds that they could get. And he would sign it in a heartbeat, of course, but that has to come from Congress. So all these Republican politicians that are framing this like Joe Biden chose to only give these people $700 and that's all they're going to get, that it is so beyond the pale. Like we are so past the Rubicon of civility in politics. So like it is just completely normal for mainstream
comparing it to
Republicans.
Ukraine aid, comparing it to the amounts that we're spending on like other kinds of foreign aid. It's all a strategy to make you hate immigrants, to make you think the administration doesn't have the best interests of the Americans people at heart. And again, do not ever believe their claims about anything related to the government. The loudest voices on this were pushing for a government shutdown. You think that like any of these who were saying that you shouldn't have approved a continuing resolution and we just let the government be broken and non-functional and non-funded, FEMA would still be open, by the way, but there are other services that would not be provided, essential services, if the government shuts down. Do you think that any of these people have even an ounce of shame when they were advocating for this government shutdown that would be disastrous at a time of crisis, and then also trying to ping the administration for faults that are not even its responsibility? It's just an act of God that a hurricane happened and people are suffering. There's no shame whatsoever. Don't believe them. Never believe them. Come to us.
And the accusation that Joe Biden didn't act soon enough in this case is beyond absurd. He declared a natural disaster emergency before the storm hit so that there would be no delays between the coordination between the federal government and the states to make sure that they got the resources that they needed. It is absurd to suggest that he waited. He literally could not have acted sooner. According to the laws of time, like he could not have acted sooner in this
linear
case.
time is a difficult concept for MAGA.
Yeah,
I think that there's a long history of Republicans voting against aid packages for disasters basically outside of their own constituency, but then begging for aid when floods, landslides, hurricanes, whatever, affect their own constituency. Obviously, that's deeply shameful. But it's that's also the back end. That's the reactionary solvency for that problem. It's not even to mention that they're bankrupt on the proactive solvency, which is addressing climate change. Obviously, these guys think that climate change is a hoax. And so, it's obviously a pretty ridiculous sort of general framework that we have for dealing with these emergencies. I mean, we had this is actually a Democrat I saw funny in some regards, but this was a Democrat actually who said that national flood insurance premium should be a national market, like national subsidization, because he wants basically beach home owners in Florida to pay less for their flood insurance. And it's like, guys, what are we doing here? What are we doing here? Right? This is a solution that would help basically only really, really rich people. And obviously it's a really bad policy. Like, unfortunately, I just wish that, the government and Republicans would have at least a little bit more serious of a plan when it comes to climate change, energy management, things like that. I mean, you saw, JD Vance during the debate. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was ridiculous, right? It's like, guys, when are we going to, conservatives in other countries, right? I mean, if you look at the Conservative Party of the UK, right, they'll do renewable energy mandates and, they'll invest in sustainable technologies and things like that. They don't invest quite as much as like the labor alternatives, the left alternatives in those countries. But it seems like conservative politicians in these other countries, at least like foundationally, will say that climate change is a real thing, and they'll try to have some basic sort of proactive solutions in that regard. But these Republicans are stuck still believing that climate change is a hoax.
I'd like to sort of add to that and tie it back to the answer that JD Vance gave, and one of the reasons why I think that he's being overrated by a lot of people, to be honest. Not denying that he was effective at parts in the debate, but his answer on climate change was almost too cute, too smarmy, too clever, where he's like, let's just assume for the sake of argument that climate change is a real thing. I don't think the American people appreciate like arguments in the alternative like that, where you're very clearly unable to say that climate change is happening because of your base, and you're doing this little cute thing like, oh, just assume, and I find that the inauthenticity displayed in that answer, the lack of a real plan to deal with climate change, the reference to clean air and clean, I don't know what else he said, but like denying that
clean air and water.
Yeah, that carbon emissions play any role in the planet's overall warming. I don't think that's going to resonate with people. I think that the majority of people acknowledge the reality of climate change, and they're seeing it. And I think that Tim Walz, that was one of the areas where I thought he did a really, really good job when he was bringing it back to those personal anecdotes. My farmers know. I thought that was really great from Tim Walz, and shows you the difference in seriousness, where one side, only for the sake of debate as a hypothetical stipulation, is willing to talk about policies related to climate change because of how insane their base is, where the other side is actually making the largest investments in the history of the planet on climate change.
I feel like we need to grade our opponents when it comes to their debate, not on the substance, because we're obviously going to disagree with everything that they say. But I feel like JD Vance was like very obviously, I think, quite quite sharp in that kind of a setting. Like he was it's just obviously a strength of his.
That's true, but I think there is going to be, to Pisco's point, right? There is going to be a substantial margin of people. I mean, you could call it 25% of people who watch the debate. I mean, some very small percentage, but that's still, millions of people who are actually paying attention to the answers, are actually looking for certain things out of the answers. And, I do think that there is a margin of people that gets very annoyed when people sort of, when politicians give like politician-y answers. That was one thing that I thought that Tim Walz did actually quite a good job of. Like, he wasn't really skirting around answering a lot of questions in the debate. And one thing that Tim Walz does that I think is pretty good, and I think it's something that Democrats just they need to stop doing this. Okay, it's been like 30 years in a row of doing this. Please, Democrats, stop trying to pretend that you're not Democrats. Just like say Democratic things and just own Democratic positions. Like, for instance, the gun answer I thought was a brilliant one from Walz, because what did Walz say? He didn't say, you know what? I agree with my opponent that mental health is a serious thing. And, I'm a gun owner and I believe in the Second Amendment. You know what he said? Sometimes it's just the guns, guys. Sometimes the guns are a problem and you need to regulate the guns, right? Just own certain positions, right? Because that's what Republicans do. Republicans will say climate change is a hoax and the Democrats are killing babies and Haitians are eating your cats and dogs. They're doing crazy things to appeal to their base. Meanwhile, the Democrats are, too scared to own basically just regulating guns and, banning certain types of
or regulations generally, like health regulations for food. We have demonization. I think, wasn't there like an outbreak for some boar's head ham or something? Do you guys remember this? There was some like,
goddamn, I hope not. That is, I exclusively eat boar's head for like deli meat. So
I think that you should look that up. I think there was an outbreak of something. But it was so refreshing having Tim Walz like defend basic regulations, like having fire safety codes. And I don't know. I saw that and I was like, God, it feels good to be a Walz supporter.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute then. Let's kind of close, because I know we only have a few minutes left. I do think this is important, that we all kind of hash out and also try to, spread the word among our audiences. So, Econoboi was talking about, proud Democrats being proud of, Democratic policy propositions. I was reminded of a scene from The West Wing, in which one of the campaign operatives, Bruno Gianelli, made this point, when he was trying to get President Bartlett reelected. He's like, there's something about the timidity of Democrats where we run to the corner and say, please don't hurt me. We need to be bold and proud and, give it back. And I think it's true. And it also, to me, ties into something I've complained about before, which is every time there's an election, they're not just from right-wing media, but again, so-called liberal mainstream media, how many op-eds have you seen or Substacks have you seen where it's liberals talking about how we really need to understand the conservative? That is one of the predominant political metas, that, liberals are out of touch and elitist, and what are you going to do to court conservatives, and how are you going to court this, that, and the other? But the presumption is never made. I can't think of a single time. Maybe it's out there, but I'm inundated in a lot of politics. I can't find one example where a Republican has been asked, what are you going to do to appeal to liberals? Not even, like, sometimes they'll get independents. Like, you're supposed to be president for the whole country. So what are you going to do? And on what policy position are you going to turn to your base and say, the liberals are going to get what they want on this issue? This is going to be the one time where they get what they want, and we're just going to suck it up and deal with it. It's never baked into the calculus. It's never assumed. They get to appeal to their base and only their base, even when they're vying for national offices or even statewide offices like governorships. It's always Republicans give Republicans what they want, but Democrats, we have to actually give Republicans what they want too. Well, we always have to empathize and reach out and moderate our positions and frame our positions in a way which will appeal to Republicans. And I'll be honest with you, and I'll shut up and pass the mic to you guys. I do understand why progressives are really fed up with that. Like, hey, maybe we should get our way, and maybe Republicans can get a timeout and just deal with it, since our policies are better for them anyway than theirs are for them. I am really frustrated by that, and I share that frustration.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, I think it was Howard Dean when he was running for president in 2004. He was kind of the progressive candidate in the primary that election. And, a reporter had remarked, like, oh, you're from the left wing of the Democratic Party. Base quote. He says, no, I'm from the Democratic wing of the Democratic Party. Like, we're Democrats, right? We're supposed to advocate for left of center values. Obviously, I mean, it's kind of the whole point of the modern day Democratic Party. So it can be definitely quite frustrating. And so, yeah, I think that Tim Walz is very refreshing in that regard. And I think one thing worth pointing out as well is that Democrats, at least, like, I don't know, like, they seem to have a history of really trying to appeal to certain bases of people. Like, Republicans, maybe one example on the Republican side is maybe the First Step Act, where that was a bipartisan piece of legislation that was basically entirely meant to try and get Black people to support Republicans. That did not seem to work. Other than that, I can't think of examples. But, like, for instance, I saw a CNN clip where they talked about how over the last 30 years, union voters have continuously shifted to the right, from being like an incredibly Democratic group of people to being basically a purple group of people, just totally 50-50. And that was at a same time period where the Democrats became more and more and more, up to this day, the most pro-union they've been in a generation, right? Issuing things like the PRO Act, an incredibly pro-labor NLRB. Lena Khan, head of the FTC, very pro-worker policies. Obviously, Union Joe really, talking about that rhetoric all the time and really making proactive steps to reach out to union membership. It's like, guys, apparently union members just, like, don't give that much of a about their union, it turns out, or they prioritize other issues or something, right? But Democrats are very consistently trying to appeal to those people. And I think in part, it's just, like, simply because Democrats, as a principle, are just pro-worker. And part of being pro-worker is being pro-union. And it's not necessarily because of, the electoral consequences. I mean, private union, people employed as union workers in private industry is like 5% of workers, which is like 2.5% of people. It's a very small proportion of people that don't make that big of a deal with regard to overall election outcomes. But Democrats still consistently try to appeal to those people with policy because that's just simply a principle that they believe in. I can't really point to many analogies on the other side. To Jesiah's point, they seem to basically just want to appeal to their already established and marginally dwindling base.